Lord Mandelson, thank you for speaking to us today. You left your position in Washington for reasons we'll come to in a few minutes, but you have a unique perspective from having been Britain's ambassador and dealing with Donald Trump in the White House. How should governments, including the UK, react to this incredibly turbulent beginning to 2026, his strikes on Venezuela and his threat to grab a NATO ally in Greenland?
I know people will sometimes be taken aback by his language and his approach to things. And I had a ringside seat, in a sense, and so I saw how the Truth Social posts would come out and how some people used language and took positions that were, to our mind in Europe, quite undiplomatic. But from his point of view, you need to understand that he feels that we live in a world that's full of conflicts, of hard power, of growing rivalry, and particularly between the United States and China, and that sometimes nettles have to be grasped, and that requires deterrence. If you want peace, you get peace through strength, but also sometimes you'll have to use force as well. And I think we've got to understand that and not simply react the whole time to the language he uses.
But it's more than language, though, isn't it? It's action. I mean, at the beginning of this year, he struck Venezuela, a sovereign state. He grabbed the leader, Maduro. Few are shedding tears for him losing his position. But Donald Trump's actions are what worry so many people. Are you suggesting that the UK and its allies simply give up on the rules they've tried to promote for so long?
No, you don't ignore international law.
Looks like he does.
But you have to recognise, Laura, that there are many countries and bad actors in this world who do not obey the rules. They don't follow the rules. And if you take Putin's invasion by Russia of Ukraine, or Iran's actions in spewing out, spreading violence and terrorism across the Middle East through their funding of Hamas, of Hezbollah, of the Houthis, etc. If you think of North Korea and what they're doing, these are not countries that care about the rules. Now, I'm not saying, let me make it absolutely clear again, that we ignore international law in our response to these countries, but sometimes, I'm afraid, as a last resort, very difficult, very complex situations require decisiveness. They require sometimes force, but also, above all, for those of us in the West, they really require us working together. And I think it's wrong, by the way, for people to assume sometimes, as they do, that President Trump doesn't care about public opinion or he doesn't care about the views of his allies. It's true that he's more decisive than consultative. I mean, he is an extraordinary risk taker. But to say that he doesn't care about his allies' views is really not true.
But when it comes to Greenland, though, specifically in the last 36 hours, he has said, we'll take it the easy way or the hard way. That's a military threat to a NATO ally.
I know, but we all know, don't we? President Trump is not going to sort of, land on Greenland, take Greenland by force, occupy the whole place. He's not going to do that.
So he's not going to do that?
I don't know, but I'm offering you my best judgment as somebody who's observed him at fairly close quarters. He's not a fool. He knows fully well. And those people around him, and he has a very tight circle, Vice President J.D. Vance, Secretary Rubio, Secretary Besson, Pete Hegseth. These are people who work with him in a very collaborative way. And they will be reminding him that were he to intervene in such a unilateral way of deploying military force in order to take Greenland, that would be completely counterproductive and would spell real danger for America's national interest. And that's why I think it's not going to happen like that. What's going to happen is there's going to be a lot of discussion, a lot of consultation, a lot of negotiation. And at the end of the day, we are all going to have to wake up to the reality that the Arctic needs securing against China and Russia. And if you ask me who is going to lead in that effort to secure, we all know don't we, that it's going to be the United States, unless we in Europe, unless we in Britain are prepared to stump up the forces and the radars and the anti-missile systems and the air defence systems to protect Greenland and the Arctic. Are we? No, we're not. And that's why we're, at the end of the day, going to be dependent on the United States to do so.
But it is clear, though, from Donald Trump's actions and his rhetoric that he is no longer willing to provide the security guarantees for our continent, for Europe, that America has for such a long time. So
I'm sorry. It's not clear that he's not prepared to provide security guarantees.
Not the same level of security guarantee. Okay. That's what he said.
Well, what he's saying is that the piggybacking has got to stop. And we all recognise that too. Our own Prime Minister and Defence Secretary recognise that. The question is when and how and over what period of time we are going to invest sufficiently in our military capabilities, our defence and our security, and not just us in Britain, but in the rest of the Europe, in order to step up more to provide for our own security.
And as things stand, the Prime Minister has given extra commitment to spend more on defence than had previously been planned. But do you think that level of commitment...
I'm sorry, but the money's got to follow.
Well, that was going to be my question. As things stand, we don't know where all of that money is going to come from. So are you convinced that this government in this country has really grasped that nettle, has really worked out, as you say, that the world has changed fundamentally and that needs a different level of support and belief in paying for our own defence from UK governments?
I think the principle is accepted. I think the funding is embraced, but I haven't seen the financial plans. Not for the future, not in the way that they need to build up and unfold in the years to come. And look, this is difficult. I mean, we have huge fiscal challenges on us as a country. The welfare bill is spiralling, looking after the elderly and their social care, net zero, debt servicing, paying for how much we borrow costs the earth. So, of course, spending more on defence is going to be hard, but it is going to be necessary.
Do you think the government's been completely straight with us, the public, yet about the kinds of sacrifices or the kind of changes, perhaps, that might be required to get to the level of spending that you believe is needed?
I think there are very real and difficult choices to be made and trade-offs. There are real trade-offs that have got to be made. But let me get back, if I may, to President Trump, because I don't want to be sort of a commentator on my own government. President Trump is not just going to expect Britain, but Germany, France and other European countries to fulfill the commitments they made at the NATO summit last year. It's not just Britain, it's all European countries who have got to step up. All the members of NATO have got to fulfill the commitments and the promises they made. And I'm afraid, not just in our own country, but in others too, we've yet to see the detail of those plans.
But how are leaders, whether it's Keir Starmer or other European leaders, meant to respond when you say Donald Trump's actually not going to invade Greenland, he's not going to use the military against a NATO ally? But that's what he said repeatedly. And when it came to Venezuela, he made many similar warnings, and many people thought, oh, well, he's not really going to do it. And then he did.
Yeah, but a lot of it is he's exercising American leverage. Okay? He's getting people to focus. He's getting people in the right place for a negotiation to start. That's how he works. And that's what I believe he's doing in the case of Greenland. I'm not saying that he was waiting for a negotiation to start with President Maduro. I'm not saying that. But if you take another country like Iran, for example, where we have a very, very fast changing and I think increasingly urgent situation to face in Iran, he gave plenty of warning to the regime about what would happen and what he would follow through if they ceased their uranium enrichment and the development of their military nuclear program. And at the end of the day, they didn't act, they wouldn't negotiate, they weren't talking sensibly, and he went in and used force.
And he bombed them, And this weekend, he said if the Iranian regime were to shoot protesters in the streets who are out there trying to fight for a democratic way of life, he said if the government forces shoot protesters, America would shoot back. So what do you think he means by that? Would he intervene?
I'm really not sure what he means by that, but I do know that there are millions of people in Iran who want their freedom back, who want to restore their democracy, who want a good, progressive, secular leadership in place so that they can remake their country. And they look to us, the United States, Britain, France, Germany, and others, as their friends to give them that support when the time comes. I can't tell you exactly what form that support will take, but I do not think, given everything that is at stake, both for the Iranian people themselves, but also for the change we want to see, the transition we want to see in Iran, in order to make Iran once again a peaceful democratic player in the Middle East, we cannot stand idly by and simply allow events to take their course without giving any assistance or support to the Iranian people.
So what should assistance be then? What kind of form should that take?
I'm not sure what form it should take. And I'm not anticipating a military intervention. It's really not my job to do that. But what I would say is, I hope there are some really serious, urgent, intensive discussions taking place between the United States and its European allies, as well as other players in the Middle East, in the region, about what we can do to bring about and help support this democratic transition in Iran.
You know that in your own party, that sometimes the very thought of any more vigorous military intervention and even the thought of closer relationships with Donald Trump, to some people in your party and on the broader left, and some people watching this interview, they think actually what the UK should be doing is condemning the way that Donald Trump behaves.
Look, I know there are many people, and not just in my party and not just in this country, who prefer pearl clutching and moral indignation and outrage over grasping a reality and doing something about it. Yes, that is the case. But I think that what we've got to recognise, and again, not just in my party and not just in our country, is that if we want the United States to lead in an active, responsible and respectful way, then we have got to beef up our own diplomatic muscle and indeed our own military hard power, and demonstrate that we are relevant and useful to the United States in what they have to do to keep the world a stable and a peaceful place. And if we don't do that, if we don't demonstrate our relevance, then we can't expect to be taken seriously. We can't expect to be listened to and to influence what the United States is doing.
But you know that it can be politically toxic for UK governments to take a tougher line on defence and military intervention. You were around during the Iraq period, and that was toxic for your party and Tony Blair's government.
I know, but shall I tell you something also? I think probably not just us, but actually the United States and its political leaders have learned a lot, not just from Iraq, but from Vietnam as well. These were not two entirely successful forever wars that the United States fought and led. And actually, I think you will find in the minds of the American leadership, President Trump and those around him, that they are very mindful of those lessons and that experience, and they want to do things differently in the future.
But is it right for multiple governments and international organisations to completely rejig the way that they have worked, to rejig the kind of rules-based order, to use the jargon, that they've been attached to for years because of the character of one American president who will not be there forever?
I know, but Laura, we need a US president to be decisive. We need a US president not simply to sit at home and sit on his hands and doing nothing, where American heft is needed elsewhere in the world to sort problems. And we've got to ask ourselves, I think, whether our reaction is because we don't want any US president to act decisively, or whether actually we're simply allergic to Donald Trump and we're not thinking objectively enough about what he's actually doing, what he needs to do, and the support we should give. And I think that this sort of allergic reaction to Trump personally mustn't be allowed to get in the way of Britain's objective national interest.
Whose side is he on when it comes to Ukraine?
He is definitely on the side of maintaining and protecting the sovereignty, freedom and democracy of Ukraine.
And you're convinced by that? Is that something he said to
I
you?
we have discussed it. I have no doubt that that is the case. Now, how you bring about the end of Russia's invasion, how you reach a settlement between those two countries, and what it means territorially, obviously is open to debate and to negotiation. But one thing I'm absolutely sure, he wouldn't be doing this. He wouldn't be expending so much energy and effort and time on Ukraine if he didn't believe in a very basic way in the sovereignty and the freedom of the Ukrainian people.
Did you like Donald Trump?
I found him, did I like him? Yes, I liked his humour, his graciousness.
Graciousness? That's not a word that many people
No,
might associate with Donald Trump.
No, I know it isn't. I know it isn't because he has for many people, he has a completely different image. I liked his directness. You knew exactly what he was thinking and where you stood and what he wanted and how he was proposing to engage with you. Did I like all his language? No, I didn't. Did he make me gasp sometimes in some of the things he said? Of course. But at the end of the day, President Trump is an extraordinary risk taker. And for me, in the world today, given all its conflicts and its dangers, and how I would define leadership of a country, I attach a lot of importance to somebody's preparedness to take risks, and he does, for good reasons, in pursuit of good objectives. And we've seen that in relation to Ukraine. We've seen it in relation to Gaza. Do you think any other country than the United States would be able to pull apart Hamas and the Israeli Defense Forces? No. Do you think there's any other country that would be able now to be embarking on a phase 2 of this peace process, this peace settlement in Gaza? No. Not the Europeans, I'm afraid. They're not there to do this. The United States is, with us in support, I hope, and contributing to the process. But at the end of the day, in so many cases, and I think Iran is another one coming up, it's American heft that makes the difference.
Now, you lost your job as ambassador because of your friendship with the convicted paedophile, Jeffrey Epstein. You've said many times you regret that you were close to him. But there's a question many people have. It was one thing to be friends with him in the early 2000s, quite another to keep your friendship going with him when it was clear and he had a conviction for abusing young women. Why did you stick with him?
Well, it was a most terrible mistake on my part. I believed the story he told in 2008 in his first indictment in Florida. I accepted his story, and I wish I hadn't. I gave my support to somebody because I believed what he was telling me, and it was misplaced loyalty. But I just have to say this to you. While it's had the most calamitous consequences for me, and I regret ever having been introduced to him in the first place. I regret continuing a friendship with him. The crux of this is not me. The crux of this is not the friendship I had 25 years ago with Jeffrey Epstein. The crux of this is that so many hundreds of young women were completely trapped, powerless in a system that did not listen to what they had to say. I didn't hear their voices. Other people didn't hear their voices. They were disempowered within that system.
You described him, though, as your best pal. We've all seen the pictures of you relaxing with him on holiday in a bathrobe. During the time you spent with him, did you ever, at any point, see or hear anything that gave you any cause for concern? Anything whatsoever?
Look, I was at the edge of this man's life.
You described him as your best pal.
Yeah. And they were awful, toe-curling messages and emails that were published. And they're very embarrassing and it just make me distraught every time I hear them. But I have to say to you, and I can say this absolutely, I can say it to you categorically, I never saw anything in his life when I was with him, when I was in his homes, that would give me any reason to suspect what this evil monster was doing in preying on these young women. Now, do you really think that if I knew what was going on and what he was doing with and to these vulnerable young women, that I'd have just sat back, ignored it and moved on and said, okay, that's his life, he can get on with it? Do you think I would have done that? Do you think I'd have written emails like that if I had had any one iota of knowledge or suspicion of what he was doing? I certainly would not.
But you did have the knowledge that he had a conviction.
Yes, and I believed...
He had a conviction for abusing women.
And I believed his story.
Over a court.
And I believed I believed his story and that of his lawyer, who spent a lot of time trying to persuade me of this, because I did go into it, that he had been falsely criminalized in his contact with these young women. Now, I wish I had not believed that story. I wish I had been more skeptical. I wish I had been more questioning, but I'm afraid I believed a story. I believed a friend. I placed mistaken loyalty in place of the skepticism that I should have shown, and I deeply, deeply regret it.
You made clear, though, at the time also, you made clear when this story was running very hard, that as a gay man, you had never been offered any kind of sexual favour. There were never any conversations at all.
Possibly some people will think because that I'm a gay man, I was sort of insensitized or I wasn't attuned to what was going on. I don't really accept that. I think the issue is that because I was a gay man in his circle, I was kept separate from what he was doing in the sexual side of his life. I mean, he in a sense had three buckets of people in his life: the business and the financial, the political and the academic, and then what he was doing with young women. It's possible that some people crossed over, but I didn't. And I think probably the reason I was separate from the third of those is because I'm gay.
But what did you think all the young women on the island or on the plains were there for? What did you think they were doing?
When I spent on one occasion 2 nights, I think, or 3 nights on the island, the only other people there were 2 middle-aged housekeepers.
So it was that separate for you?
Epstein was never there. Epstein was never there. I think Ghislaine Maxwell, his accomplice, came for a night, but there were no girls on that island when I was there. That whether on the island or in New York, or there was another occasion, I stayed at a ranch in New Mexico. Again, the only people were there were the housekeepers. Never were there any young women or girls or people that were he was preying on or engaging with in that sort of ghastly predatory way.
Do you want to take this chance to apologise to his victims for your association with him, which went years beyond his original conviction?
I want to apologise to those women for a system that refused to hear their voices and did not give them the protection they were entitled to expect.
You apologise for your association with him after his conviction?
That system gave him protection and not them. If I had known, if I was in any way complicit or culpable, of course I would apologise
But you won't
for it.
for your association with him after his conviction.
But I was not culpable. I was not knowledgeable of what he was doing, and I regret and will regret to my dying day the fact that powerless women, who are denied a voice, were not given the protection they were entitled to expect from the American system.
Then we come to your time as ambassador. At the highest levels of government, people felt you'd misled them about how close you were to Epstein and about how your friendship had continued after his conviction. And the line from the government was that you were sacked because new information came to light. That's what they said. Is that true? Or do you think you told them everything?
The emails that were published came as a huge surprise and a huge shock to me, not just to them. I didn't remember sending them. I still don't actually recall the circumstances or thought processes that led me to send them. They no longer existed on my server, long since disused. So it came as a shock to them and it came as a surprise, but I was unable to share emails with them that I didn't recall and I didn't possess.
But a senior figure in government told me you'd been economical with the truth, to use their phrase, when you gave them assurances before you were given the job as American ambassador about your relationship with him. Were you economical with the truth?
Whoever said that to you was obviously not amongst the officials in number 10 Downing Street I spoke to during the consideration of me as ambassador.
So you told them everything?
They knew everything.
Did you therefore deserve to be sacked?
But not the emails,
but aside from that,
because they came as a surprise to me.
Did you deserve to be sacked?
I understand why I was sacked.
It's a different question.
The Prime Minister found himself in the middle of what must have seemed to him a sort of thermonuclear explosion. I've been there. I know what goes on. I know how these circumstances are. Look, I wish I'd had the opportunity to remind him of the circumstances of my relationship, my friendship with Jeffrey Epstein, and how I came to write the emails in the first place. I didn't. So I understand why he took the decision he did. But one thing I'm very clear about is I'm not going to seek to reopen or relitigate this issue. I'm moving on. I realise I won't be going back into public office.
Well, I was going to ask, what's next? What do you want to do?
Well, who knows what's next? I don't know what's next. But I'm not going to go and just sort of disappear and hide. That's not me. I will find something useful to do. I don't know what it is, and no doubt it will take some time to discover. I am absolutely determined to be transparent about what happened, and I have been, and will continue to be.
And will you be transparent about your view of how the Labour government is doing? Do you think that Keir Starmer ought to be the person who leads Labour into the next election, or would you have any advice for him about how to climb out of the doldrums? I mean, it has been a dreadful start to his time in office in so many ways.
You know, when I was in government and advising prime ministers and being a campaign director for my party, one thing I couldn't stand is people who went on the Sunday morning programmes like armchair generals and commentators telling us how badly we were doing and how if only we adopted all their views, how much better we would be doing.
Maybe you might have helpful advice for them because they are in a fix. You know that. Keir Starmer has become incredibly unpopular, incredibly quickly.
I think the government faces some real serious challenges. We've touched on one or two of them during the course of our discussion. They are huge challenges. They're huge challenges. I do think they have the policies and the determination to navigate there and the country's way through them. I do believe that Keir Starmer will continue to give the leadership he is in that process, but let us not underestimate how difficult the coming years are going to be. They're going to be really very difficult indeed.
Lord Mandelson, thanks so much for taking the time to speak to us.